Howdy, folks. Welcome to the podcast Iron. My name is Laura Mullen-Vermilia, and on this podcast, I interview members of the cast iron art community in order to inspire, educate, and spread ideas about iron casting and cast iron art. I am delighted to have Phoenix Savage as our guest on today's episode. Phoenix learned iron casting while earning her MFA at Georgia State, and in this interview, she informs me of some facets of industrial iron casting in American history that I was unaware of. Phoenix, thank you so much for reaching out and introducing yourself to me. I am so glad that we were able to connect, and I was delighted to get to know you. Thank you for teaching me about portions of the social history of cast iron in America that I was unaware of, and I'm thrilled that others will be able to learn these facts as well by listening to this interview. The Podcast Iron Show is sponsored in part by individual supporters on Patreon. And yes, that's about 20 of our friends and colleagues. So thank you to everyone who has joined as a Patreon member to help me afford the production costs of keeping this show going. And I'd also like to thank the top supporters of the show, which are the Western Cast Iron Art Alliance, Sloss Metal Arts, and Crescent Creative. These fantastic organizations provide the main resources keeping my ability to produce these episodes afloat. So I'm just going to take a few moments to introduce them to you. The Western Cast Iron Art Alliance is an organization that consists of iron casting artists in the western states of the U.S. Their organization's goals are to educate, demonstrate, and exhibit cast iron art in the western region of the U.S. And one of the ways that they accomplish this goal is by hosting a conference every 2 years. So start planning to come out west for their conference in fall of 2024. This upcoming Western Conference will be at the tail end of October in San Diego, California. And I just want to point out that you don't have to live in the West to attend the Western Conference, so you should definitely make the trip. They'll love to have you. A big thank you to the Western Cast Iron Art Alliance and their board members for their support of this podcast. For more information about this fantastic organization, please visit their website, which is wciaa.org. Another top supporter of the show is Sloss Metal Arts, which is a national center for iron casting and metal art. Based in Birmingham, Alabama, they host our National Conference on Contemporary Cast Iron Art and Practices every 2 years. To keep up to date on the national conference related things, follow NCCC-IAP on Instagram, but also follow Sloss Metal Arts on Instagram and TikTok, and they'll keep you up to date on all things Sloss related and conference related. Besides hosting the national conference, Sloss Metal Arts also has a full year-round schedule, including cast iron bowl making events, and the foundry is available to be rented out if you want to bring your class there or host an event with their artists. For more information about the Sloss Metal Arts program, visit their website, which is slossmetalarts.com. Thank you, Sloss Metal Arts. Another top supporter of the show is Crescent Creative. Crescent Creative is a digital design and fabrication studio located in Birmingham, Alabama. They utilize CNC router technology to produce foundry patterns, outdoor signage, furniture, and public art commissions. If you have questions, they have solutions. You can find them on Instagram at Crescent Creative. Check them out and give them a follow. They're always up to creating interesting and artistic custom designs for their customers, and I love seeing their projects pop up on my Instagram feed. Thank you, Crescent Creative, for becoming a top sponsor. Your support really means so much to us. And one more thing before we get into the interview, I just want to mention an upcoming opportunity for the display of your large outdoor artwork. The city of O'Fallon, Missouri hosts a rotating sculpture series called The Shape of Community, and they have provided me with this exciting and informative video clip to show you, so let's watch it now.
If you're an artist or know someone who is, become a part of O'Fallon, Missouri's The Shape of Community Rotating Sculpture Series. No matter what medium you choose to sculpt your masterpiece, you get to use the whole O'Fallon community as your canvas. The Shape It community invites artists from across the U.S. to have their work installed in prominent outdoor areas of O'Fallon to allow the public to see and interact with their creations. Some have even become permanent installations at sites within the city. Visit o'fallon.mo.us/shapeitcommunity for current examples and for more information on how to submit. So whether you weld it, cast it, or carve it, let the Shape It community shine a light on your creation. It's time to cast your mold on a city's landscape.
Yes, when you visit their website, you will see that the cast iron art community is very well represented in the group of 10 sculptures presently installed. So you've got a good shot. The deadline for this call for submissions is coming up soon, and they will be jurying your entries in early March of 2024. So start thinking about what piece from your catalog you're going to apply with and get your submission in. If you have detailed questions about this opportunity, please contact the Cultural Arts Coordinator, Martin Linson, at mlinson@ofallon.mo.us. But all of the information about how to apply is on their website. And this is a great outlet for iron casting artists to show all the big heavy metal works that we've been casting. So finally, let's get into this conversation. Thank you so much for tuning in today, and please enjoy. Phoenix Savage, welcome. Thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
So this is really exciting for me because I don't know anything about you besides maybe perusing your Instagram a little bit to try and find out a little bit. And we all do it. We all do it. But I really want you to tell us, well, Phoenix, who the hell are you anyways?
Let's see. I'm a person in transition right now. I am an artist. So I do think of myself as an artist. I think of myself as a scholar, do a lot of research in reference to my art, in reference to other topics that interest me. So my original graduate degree was in medical anthropology. So that plays a lot into how I approach my art and how I approach life in general. It's really from that sort of anthropological lens. And it helps me be less frustrated if I try to figure out why someone might have that particular behavior or what might be going on culturally that's causing that particular behavior. Then I don't have to take it personally. I don't have to, I can accept that it has nothing whatsoever to fucking do with me. And I can just be like, oh, that's interesting, and move on. So I like that. So yeah, so anthropology is pretty big in it may not be like the thing I do professionally a great deal, but it's definitely it definitely informs how I move in the world and how I move with my art in the world. So I would say that would be that's pretty much who I am. Everything else is pretty obvious.
Yeah. Well, let's go rewind back and kind of start maybe at the beginning in your childhood so you can try and help me understand even more about you. Do you have any stories that you can remember from your childhood about early introduction to art, or maybe how you got into your interest into culture and anthropology, and maybe something that influenced you to become the person you are today?
Yeah, the anthropology, I really don't know how that happened per se, but the art part, I can definitely from childhood see where hanging out with my crafty grandparents was a big influence. They were retired, and so my summers would be spent with them in Philadelphia, and they were big supporters of the Senior Citizen Center, which always had some kind of craft project going on. So if I came one summer, it could be, rug making. I could come the next summer, it was candle making. I could come the next summer, it was ceramics. I think one time I came, it was wine making, and I couldn't participate with that one.
Yeah, understandably. Yeah.
Right. So let's see. So I think so. I would just each summer it was a different project. It could have been, I think, really early on. It was like the oil paint by numbers.
Yeah.
And so just doing each time doing that and then carrying that forward when I would go home, I would, convince my parents that they should buy me these little crafty things that I could engage with and do. And, for the most part, I was the only girl. So they kind of did those things to keep me from annoying my brothers or being annoyed by my brothers. And so that would be it. That sense of, so I think in the long run, what that gave me was this exploration for materiality.
Yeah.
And that was really, I've always felt that was really significant. It also gave me that appreciation between craft and the making process and exploring different making methods.
Yeah.
I don't think that my grandparents, they were not, they were just about learning what it was. Whatever the center was offering, that's what they were willing to learn how to do. And then they went like whole hog into it, like, all right, we're going to buy kilns now. Okay, so the basement is filled with kilns. We're going to, the wine, the basement is going from being a ceramic center to a wine center. And, so whatever it was, they would, invest their time and money into learning that particular craft. And for no other reason other than to learn it. It wasn't that they were going to sell any of these things. They weren't making them as gifts for people. I remember when one summer I came and my grandfather had made a candle and it was a monkey. Mm-hmm. And so this could be, some people be like, I don't talk about monkeys, but it was a monkey. And he was so proud of it. He had just finished making it. And my family lived in kind of a walking distance. His elderly aunt lived a block above. So she was like my great aunt. And she was his aunt. So she was my great aunt or something to that effect. She always had blue hair. So I thought that was fascinating. But he wanted me to take it to her, to show her.
Yeah.
So he gave me probably an hour of instructions on how to hold the candle, how to walk slowly with the candle. And I'm thinking I'm probably walking less than 100 steps to take to show her. She just lived in the next block. So we were kind of at the beginning of the block. She was also at the beginning or end of her block, but it was at the beginning. So it was just, and he stood on the porch watching, hollering out instructions of how slow to walk. Are you holding it correctly? Yada, yada, yada. All so that I could take this candle and show her. So that just stayed in my mind. But what it gave me was this sort of reverence for your making, reverence for the things that you put your creative energy into doing, and also the wanting to show other people. He was just always so proud, and I feel like it was more him than my grandmother. Mm-hmm. I think she just kind of went along with it. I think she might have liked the social activity at the center. Yeah. And the ladies at the center, but I'm not sure that once they got back home, she was as invested in the making of things, because when I think back on it, I always made things with him.
Okay.
And not necessarily with her. So those things, those were like those early formative years, even though I did not have a clue that they would matter later. It was just fun to do. It was creative. I didn't know what an artist was. Nobody said, oh, this is what you do when you want to be an artist. Nobody ever explained that. No one ever said that. And no one ever said, there's a job in the world called artist. And this is what you can grow up and do. So it was more like, I think for my mom, when I finally said, oh, I wanted to be an artist, it was more she was a little kind of confused. And it was more like, those things are just hobbies, honey. You don't do them in real life. So it was a way of, it was a big battle between she and I as I tried to figure out what was an artist and how to become an artist. And that journey took a really long time. So I didn't really have a lot of art training in school. She always wanted me to take typing lessons. Who wants typing lessons? I didn't. So I would drop.
And should we, this is really, you're going to laugh, but we're going to clarify typing on a typewriter?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And not electric.
Yeah. So that'll be kind of I needed to clarify that because I know that some listeners are younger
I think
than me.
Electric typewriters were just becoming the thing. So we might have had electric typewriters at school. I'm not sure. I don't think so. I remember hitting the damn thing back.
The ding.
So, yeah, the dingy thing. I like the dingy part of it, but no, I hated typing. I absolutely hated it. So I would, sign up for this class, and then I would drop it, and I would take an art class. And, my mother would not find out until grades, report cards came in. And then it would cause a big argument about why did I drop that typing class and how important typing was. And it was not important, but it was important to her. That's what she did. She was a secretary. She was a secretary at a high school. So it was significant. It got her, it took care of us as a family. It, made money. And so she felt like that was like something to, quote unquote, fall back on.
Yeah.
And I was like, I don't really want to fall back. I want to keep going forward. I don't want to fall back.
Yes.
So we just always had like semantic type arguments about the whole art thing. And then finally, I think my first exhibition was in 1997. I had an exhibition in Natchez, Mississippi. And my mom came to the exhibition, and I overheard her say the most profound thing. So she's there, she's looking at my art. And at that point, it was pretty much assemblage art. I think I started out doing photography, and that morphed into assemblage art. And she came to the exhibition, and I overheard her say to one of the patrons, I used to just think my daughter just made stuff, but now I know she's an artist. And that was so like, oh my gosh, I can't believe she said that. So that was really, really kind of like maybe sealed the signification of being an artist for me, was hearing her say that. And then just constantly pushing onward with the journey of making. But I was doing making, pretty much assemblage making, for quite a while, up until Hurricane Katrina. And at that point, after Hurricane Katrina, I think I missed being in the hurricane by about a few weeks, but my things were still there in New Orleans. So they were completely destroyed. And I remember thinking, I want to make things that are indestructible, things that can survive a hurricane, things that just can float and do whatever and not be, destroyed. And I started taking art classes at a school in Northern Louisiana, Northwestern State University, with my teacher was Matt DeFord, who I'm actually going to see this Thursday. He's going to be in town with his students. And so I'm going to have lunch with him. And so that's pretty cool.
Awesome.
So with Matt, that's how I started. That's where I learned how to weld and cast. And we didn't have an iron foundry, but we had bronze. And so that was the first thing that I ever cast. The first thing I ever cast was my head, but I didn't like it. Once it came out, I know when you cast things, the sprues and the gates and the vents, that thing looked so ugly to me. It was horrible. I was like, well, I don't get it. I don't like it. To this day, I don't know where it is. I might have scrapped it. I'm not sure. But I never, ever cut off the sprues and gates and all of that stuff because I just thought it was hideous and what was the point? And I didn't like it. But after that, I did make other castings, which I did like and began to really enjoy the process. And I think the happiest process for me is the wax. Is the wax, is the molding and the chasing of the wax. That's so meditative.
Yes.
I can sit for hours and hours and do that. I love it. So it wasn't until I got to that program with Matt wasn't an MFA, and I wanted an MFA.
Mm-hmm.
And so I that's when I applied to Georgia State and began there and working with George Beasley.
Yeah.
And he's still my friend to today, George and Judy. He was, he was big in the whole iron environment and what have you, still is. But I wasn't attracted to it at first. It was a 3-year program. So it was probably not until my second year that I became attracted to it. And how I became attracted was the iron pour, they have one every year. And the guys, they talk about it. And I pour 600 pounds of iron today. And
Yeah.
I'm like, I don't get it. I don't really give a shit. But what happened was I was reading a book. I was reading a book called Dreaming of Africa in Alabama. I think that's the full title of it, Dreaming of Africa in Alabama. And it's a story. It's a really, really wonderful. Wonderful is not the best word to use, but it's a riveting story. And it's the story of the last slave ship that comes into North America and offloads in Mobile, and traces the story of some of those people and what became of them after enslavement and how they formed this. There's actually a documentary on Netflix about it now. I think the documentary is called Descendants.
Okay.
But prior to that, there's this book called Dreaming of Africa in Alabama. And when I read the book, at the very end of the book, it talks about a grandson of as a descendant of one of these enslaved people, and how he ends up in prison for, I don't remember if it was murder or what he ended up in prison for, but everyone liked him in spite of the fact that he ends up in prison. He was just a really well-liked person in both the Black and white community. And they petitioned the governor, who might have been Governor Sloss at the time, in which, however, Sloss gets its name from this prominent person. So anyway, so the thing about it was the guy ends up getting a pardon.
Okay.
But in getting a pardon, he then gets a job or gets assigned as a part of his parole to work in the foundry at Sloss.
Wow. Okay.
And so in seeing that brought me to George. And I'm like, George, look, and I tell him about this, and he's like, oh, here, I got a better book for you. And so, not better, but a different book.
Yeah.
So he gives me this book. The book is called Bonds of Iron. And it was so amazing, so fascinating. And from that point on, I was like hooked on iron, but not in the way, again, still couldn't care about how many pounds of iron somebody poured, couldn't care about building a furnace or any of those things, but the looking at the history. So this Bonds of Iron was written by, I think his name was Charles Dew, D-E-W.
Okay.
And I forget where he was a professor, but anyway, he writes this amazing story about iron plantations, which I had never heard of before.
I've never heard of it. I just want to stop you and tell you I am so excited about how the rest of this interview is going to go. and I feel like me and everybody listening, we have a reading list now.
Yeah, those two books are really good.
Yeah, and I bet that you're going to drop some more good literary bombs on us.
I don't know if I have any more books, but those two are definitely
okay. So
wonderful.
Anyways, so now continue on, but you're doing a great job.
So the book Bonds of Iron talks about iron plantation. It gives you this whole history. So like the first iron plantation was in Lynn, Massachusetts. That was the workers were 30 indentured Scotsmen who didn't last long because of drinking. So they didn't last long. They didn't do very well. So northern Iron furnaces or factories mostly relied on European immigrants, and Southerns relied on enslaved labor. And so on the ones that they actually called iron plantations were enslaved laborers, but they had a different, I mean, slavery is slavery, and it's not, there's no way to is not a sugarcoating to that process. But for those people who worked on those plantations, they had a little bit of an edge versus someone who worked in an agricultural plantation, worked on an agricultural plantation. And that was the first time reading that book. That was actually the first time that I understood the difference. I had heard the terms agricultural or task labor versus, I can't think if I can remember. The point of it is this: if I were enslaved on a cotton plantation, let's say,
Okay.
the only my chore is to just constantly pick cotton, just constantly pick cotton. I've got no leverage over those people who oversee me in picking that cotton. But for the men, and to some degree women, but in a different role, if they worked in an iron plantation, those men had leverage. And that leverage was that, one, they knew how to, and they were making pig iron. So they weren't casting iron. They were basically making the pig iron that was then sold to northern industries, where they were then, like in places like Pennsylvania, making the cast iron skillets and things like that.
Okay.
So just to clear that out. But if your pig iron is bad, and you send it to the cast iron people to use your pig iron, and it's not very good, and it makes a very brittle iron. And so that person, that manufacturer, is not going to want to continue to use you because you're not giving him good iron to make his product. He's not going to be able to sell his product, and the whole system of capitalism isn't going to be able to be good for them. So in the case of the person working on those iron plantations, they had a skill. They had a very specific skill, and they could destroy the profits of the plantation owner. So what this guy do is expressing in the book, and is theorizing, is that there had to be a compromise, a level of collaboration between the owner and the workers. Not only that, the workers were they were all in one large family. So let's say that I own a iron furnace, and my business goes out of business, or the guy, let's say I'm the wife, the husband dies, so I'm going to have to sell off everything. So, but unlike in a cotton plantation where you would sell a mother and a child separately, or you sell a father and leave the mother and child behind, you wouldn't do that in an iron plantation. So you would sell everyone as a unit, because everyone in that unit has some role to play in making that iron happen. So either they understand how to run the furnace, or they understand how to hammer the pig iron, or whatever the hell they're hammering, or they understand how to make the charcoal, cut the trees down and make the charcoal. So whatever those little tasks were, they came as a unit. And so if a plantation had to close down for some reason, then someone would come and purchase the whole stock. So it allowed, very differently, it allowed for longevity of continuity between family members that sometimes didn't happen in other plantation environments, agricultural plantations. It allowed for these guys to negotiate and say that they wanted certain holidays off.
Okay.
So they had, in their own way, kind of bargaining power.
Good.
So they didn't have a union, but they had bargaining power to make certain demands about their label. They would go on strike. They would, again, insist on certain things. And another odd thing about them is that they actually, they didn't necessarily have enslaved people themselves, but they had enslaved people who became their workers.
Okay.
Because if they're working on the iron, they can't do farming to feed themselves.
Yeah.
So then they would have to have a core of little farmers that are working for them to feed their family. So again, and on one level, this is a role that the wife played, but she got to be more of a stay-home wife in a sense, and do certain cooking and different chores to any that planter or that furnace owner was willing to maintain any kind of system that kept that iron going.
Yeah.
And usually those furnaces just ran. And so you have to keep them. You don't want to shut them down because they're not really the startup to getting them back up and running is too cost prohibitive. So you want to keep it going. Once you get it in operation, you want to keep that going. And you want those guys to have, quote unquote, some level of happiness, even though they're still enslaved. Don't get me wrong, they're enslaved. But they have this small little bargaining that makes their existence slightly different from the other guy that's out working in the cotton fields. And I found that fascinating. There was one story that I will never forget. There was a guy who he made a bet with someone, and he made the bet, and he backed up the bet. The person that he made the bet with was not sure that he could pay if he lost. And the guy went so far to explain to him that, of course, I can pay. I have money in the bank. So this is an enslaved person who has a bank account, which is pretty much never ever heard of. And the reason we know this is because the owner of the furnace is keeping all these notes, and he's also keeping a record for this guy of his money in the bank. And so this is in his diary. And so there's proof that this guy really did. And so all he would have to do is go to the owner, the overseer or the owner, to say, I want to withdraw X to pay my debt.
Okay.
And so he was able to, I don't know if this meant he had a gambling issue. I don't remember that part or why he was making this bet. But the point is that there is this historical record of the fact that there's an enslaved person who actually has a bank account, which is rather unheard of. So for me, my relationship with iron has far more to do with these really rich historical nuances of how iron is being, comes into the Americas, how it's being functioned and moving and building capitalism that's happening, through the labor of these enslaved people, but they are totally functioning, not totally, but let's say a third or 2/3 of their life is functioning with a level of agency that we don't always have in agricultural enslavement. Because they're just the nature of it. It's not that there's not agency happening in those agricultural situations, but the nature of the labor and the nature of the process and how it's overseen, it limits how you can have a certain amount of agency and what that agency is going to be. There are greater barriers against it, whereas that's not necessarily the case for guys and their families who were working on iron plantations. The other thing that's fascinating to me was that if I am like the head guy and I'm making however I'm making my pig iron, I've learned probably from my father, I'm going to pass it on to my son. So there was an apprentice process with it. And the other thing is that, which is kind of a good or not so good thing, is that in that apprentice process, if I make it a certain way and I make it, and in that making, there's an error, that error gets passed on as well. And so there's just some sort of compensation that happens, or you just live with the error, or it becomes a signature element of that iron versus, iron made down the road or whatever. The other thing for me about iron is that all of us as humans are made up of the same iron that we're working with as artists.
Yes.
So this notion that and when if you think if you like really want to like go all the way back, so the iron, the same iron,
Yes. Yeah.
very same iron, is the thing that they believe is what brought about the evolutionary process of Earth. So they think that some particles of iron in the ocean do whatever they did whatever they did, help to form life.
Yeah.
So I find that fascinating. And so those are the only reasons that I like it.
Yeah.
I don't really like it for any other reason. I mean, as a metal, it's actually really ugly until you do something to it. It's quite ugly. It's very labor intensive
Yes.
to work with iron. And that part I don't mind because a part of my research was about labor. So using and moving through that labor intensive process was really cool for me. It was very meditative, and it also it was a way to honor those guys
Oh,
that worked on
yes.
those iron plantations. That's how I really saw it.
Yeah.
That this process was a way to honor them, even though for me, I was mixing two processes. I was taking the lost wax process for that's used for other metals and applying that to the cast iron process. Like I don't like just sand molds.
Yeah.
That drove me crazy. So I always wanted to. It wasn't fun. I wanted to do the melt out. I wanted to make the wax situation and put it in the bonded sand and melt it out and then pour my iron. I didn't like the whole just part sand mold process. That intrigued me at all. I don't think I've ever even made one, maybe as a class project just to get a grade, but not anything I ever did.
You know, everybody has, like we talked about before we started recording, like everybody has the different things that they focus on. And some people are really like sand mold crazy, and some people do the shell. And so it like really it's whatever, different strokes for different folks, you know?
Exactly.
So you were doing, was it ceramic shell melt out of wax, or was it the
Nope.
like a classical investment?
Yeah. The actual investment in the bonded sand. So
Oh,
I use bonded resin sand,
okay.
some kind of two-part chemical
Yeah.
catalyst that you mix in the green sand,
Okay.
and you put in your object, and you go and melt it out.
In the kiln. Yeah.
Yeah, in the kiln, and then bring
Yeah.
it back down for the pour.
Awesome.
So yeah, I found that fascinating. I like
Yeah.
that process of it, and I just love working with wax. So anything that's going to
Yeah.
allow me to work with wax, maybe it goes back to that wax candle monkey. I don't know.
Maybe that's who
I never
knows?
thought of that part, but yeah, I enjoy the feel of it,
Yeah.
and just work. I don't know. I could sit around and work with wax forever. I think that if I have like one thing in my studio, it would be mountains and mountains of wax. Probably from a project that I was working on, but I have cases and cases of slabs of wax.
So what can you think of a specific favorite wax that you made and then you cast in iron, and maybe tell us about it?
So I would do well first, because they only would do at Georgia State, they only did the iron pour. It was probably, I mean, I guess the biggest one is at Christmas. So I would just work up to it. So I might have like 40,000 things to cast.
Yeah.
Which meant breaking up a lot of pieces of not iron. What's that? Yeah, I guess they were breaking up iron. But I was very clever. I figured out how to get the iron. Like go talk to somebody who has iron that will donate iron,
Yeah.
that kind of a thing, or donate the coke or something like that. Something I figured out how to get. So that kind of got me off the hook of doing all the freaking labor. So I was like, here's your head.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I have this one thing, it's called Mojo, and it is 16 lids that are upside down. And I don't know if you go to the carnival, I don't know if they even do it anymore, but when I was a kid, you would go to the carnival and there would be plates on a stick.
Okay.
So they kind of wobble. And the goal was to maybe land a dime on them, or just land something on the plates, and they would just kind of I think it's changed, but I think the way it is now, there might be plates floating around in a tub of water or something like that, and you're trying to land your dime on it. But when I was a kid, they were on a stick.
Okay.
And they had this precarious nature to them. And you were trying to land, I think you were just trying to land a dime on them. But they were always, I don't know what was making them move, but they were moving. At least in my child's mind, they were like,
Yeah.
stay still. But so I made this sculpture. It's like 6 feet in diameter, and there are 16 of these lids that are on steel poles that I had to drill into the cement to sort of hold them or whatever. And the lids are there, and then the lids have a pattern on the inside of them, and the pattern is, I don't know how to explain this, but this makes this a longer story. But
no, it's fine. Go ahead.
The patterns inside the lids are based on the Yoruba ethnic group, who their traditional divination system is based on 256 patterns called odus. And so at one point there it was this thing called Garden of Command. I changed the name for my sculptural, but if there are some of us who just have this in a 2-dimensional form, and it's just these patterns in a diagram, and the diagram represents the universe, and the patterns are positioned above and below the horizon line and so forth. And if you keep this little figure, this little piece of paper with these patterns, if you keep it near where you pray, it augments, it brings your prayer into a more powerful state of being and brings it into manifestation. So I wanted to take that and turn it into this 3D scenario. And so I took those same patterns and put them in a lid, and so that it could then stake onto these steel rods that pegged into the floor. And so if you go on my website, you can see it, but it's called Mojo. And I think that is probably like my most favorite thing. And then I have another one that I really like that George absolutely hated.
Well, tell us about it. I want to know.
Figure out why George hated that sculpture, but it's a box. So it has 4 sides, and on the ends, but it's hollow. So on the 4 sides, outside and inside, are a casting of my lips.
Okay.
And so it's just this square box, but the box sits on springs. And so it never, I don't have it with me, so I can't show you.
No, it's okay, because some people are just listening in anyways. Right. But so what did the spring?
If you go to the website, you can see it. So it just stands and it rocks.
Okay. Yeah.
It just rocks. It's only maybe like about 4 inches or 5 or 9 inches. It's not very big. It's no bigger than like a tissue box.
Okay. Yeah.
And it has, I don't know, at the top, it's got all this thread and these needles on it, and it's all this kind of thread, and there's like a little heart that hangs down inside that kind of like a pendulum swings.
Yeah.
And but I never could figure out why George didn't like it. But that was like his least favorite of all the 40,000 things I made at that one time.
But so it doesn't even matter what he likes or not. But what did it mean?
It kind of did. It did.
Oh, well, I mean, he's your professor.
I mean, it wasn't, it's not like, it wasn't about the grade or something. He didn't fail me or anything. It was just his critique of that one. That was always his least favorite. And that was like my secret favorite one, because it just felt, I don't know, it was just weird. There's no rhyme or reason for it. It was just weird, and I just liked the weirdness of it. But anyway, so yeah. But that's probably been the last time that I've done any kind of, I did some casting when I was in Africa, but it wasn't iron. But in terms of doing any iron casting, I think the last time I did it was really in grad school.
Yeah.
But my fascination with it, my love for it is no less today than it was back then when I first read that book that George gave me.
Yeah. And made
so,
that connection.
yeah, making that connection is really what solidified it, because up until that point, I completely ignored everyone else in the studio who was working on iron. I was just like, whatever,
Yeah.
whatever.
If it's not your thing, like, I mean, that's what I say. It's
Wasn't.
like, if it's not everybody's thing, and if it's not their thing, that's okay.
Yeah.
But that's such an interesting connection that you made and then leaned into. So do you want to tell us any more about, like, I'm just in awe of all of this history because I've never heard about it.
I think it's just fascinating. I don't know that there is I think I've looked for other books. I'm not sure that I found any other books, because I would have read them. There might be one more that I read that I can't think of the name of it, but it must not have been as all intriguing as the Do guy. I think he just did a fascinating wealth of history about it, and it might have been his PhD dissertation that he didn't turn into this wonderful book. But yeah, I found it fascinating. I liked the whole, sense of agency that the workers had.
Yeah.
I like the whole notion that they could call the shots about their labor. Oh, here's the other thing I found fascinating. They actually got paid overtime. So they were enslaved people, but because they had quotas, and if they made their quota, whatever their particular task is, if they made their quota, then all of that went beyond the quota was something in which is how the guy had money to put in his bank account, because he went beyond his quota. And in going beyond your quota, you actually were paid money. And you could negotiate what that amount of money was going to be, which is one of the reasons why they would go on strike if they weren't getting, why anybody would go on strike. You're not paying me what I think I'm worth, and I'm going to stop working. And no foundry person could afford for them to stop working. That's their livelihood. I also found it interesting, the whole making of charcoal. So I kind of feel like on an environmental level, it was really pretty fucked up.
Tell me about it.
I mean, just because you're cutting down all these trees and you're turning the trees into the charcoal. And I found that fascinating, because I mean, who knows? I didn't know how charcoal is made.
No, I don't know how.
Somehow it's some kind of process about trees. I don't quite get it. But you're creating, this is the way you're stoking the fire and keeping the furnace going, because it needs all that fire. I don't know how they did it at Slot. I think there must have been gas.
I don't know. Because that's the thing. Like,
that place is huge, massive.
Did you end up ever going to the conference?
I went to the conference, not as a student, but I went more recently, maybe 5 years ago. I went, and someone invited me to speak on a panel.
Yeah.
And so it's myself, Kristen Tredella Williams.
Yeah.
We're like really good buds. And the two people that were putting on the panel, and it was a really interesting panel, something about a velvet glove, something. I don't know. I don't remember, but anyway, but the person who put on the panel, we're friends to this day. So I really like that. I like that I was able to keep in touch with her, and we talk frequently. She was actually a guest speaker for my class last year.
Awesome.
So just those kind of so yes, I ended up going and seeing it for the first time. I used to just see it on the train. I would take the train from Atlanta to New Orleans, and you see it goes right by.
Wow. Okay.
But going to the conference and speaking at the conference was the first time to actually physically see it, and just how massive and how huge it was. And I would say that that's probably like the end. So if you look at from Lynn, Massachusetts, and just kind of wind through Pennsylvania and move down, I would say that that end of how can I explain this? There are lime deposits. So typographically, there are lime deposits from that high point of Massachusetts throughout wherever you find a furnace that took place along that eastern shoreline. Those lime deposits basically end there in Birmingham, which is why that became such a suitable place. Plus the abundance of labor, even though it sort of comes into being at the end of the Civil War. But there's still this abundance of labor, and there was, I think, Birmingham had one of the largest populations of African Americans because of working there at the foundry. So yeah, it's just huge. But I think it's three things you have to have for iron: is the lime deposits, the water, and the trees to be able to
Make the fuel.
Make the fuel.
Yeah.
And you are basically recycling iron. So you're just all you need is just somebody else's piece of iron.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, so iron is constantly perpetually being recycled, which is why we are breaking those pieces of iron down to melt them into our little furnaces to tap, pour out, because it's just perpetually being recycled. There's no there's I don't want to say there's no new iron, but iron is there isn't any new iron.
I mean, also there's an abundance in a way in like our world today. I feel like there is an abundance. Like, you know, we never had a shortage of brake rotors and bathtubs.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So those things are constantly being recycled. So theoretically, this is another thing that I love, and I have no idea if it's true or not, but I go with it. So theoretically, the iron that we use when we're making that iron is the same iron in our body, because theoretically, from that original piece of iron or whatever falls into the ocean in some process, whatever, someone look that up because I don't really know, but whatever that was, we are, and that iron that we make as art are all the same.
Mm-hmm.
And we're all from that very same that very same original piece of iron. So like the core of the universe, that iron, to all that we make, all that we do, we're all absolutely of that.
Yeah, it's in our blood.
Yeah, I think that's amazing. I think it's totally fascinating. I mean, I find it fascinating. I also find it fascinating just from a humanistic standpoint of just, you know, humanity and connectivity as people in relationship to a thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if I don't know that there's any other thing on the earth that we can have that connection with as people. So people thing, there is on some level, there is a seamless connection.
Yeah.
Which I don't think you can say that about people in a radio or people in a, you know, it's not possible to say that, or people even people in a cell phone.
Yeah. Or like people in clay.
Or even people in clay. Exactly. As natural as clay is. We don't have those. We don't have those clays, and we don't all have zinc in our bodies and so forth. But for the most part, even people who are low deficiency in iron, they still have iron. They just don't have a lot of it.
Mm-hmm.
You know? So I don't know. I just like that. I find it fascinating.
I do too. And it's kind of like, you know, I do have a collection of iron, like cast iron, like from antique shops and yard sales and like anything. It wasn't until I was at a flea market with my husband, and there was a weed, like a weed torch. Do you know what I'm talking about? It doesn't even really.
Yeah.
It's like what you use for yard work when you have to like burn a bunch of weeds. But the head of it, or like the tip of the torch, was this beautiful cast iron, like kind of cylinder, like, you know, about the same size as like a Campbell's soup can or something.
Mm-hmm,
but then it had these really thin little connections to the back. Like, I can't even really describe it better than it was a cast iron head to a weed burner. And it was so beautiful. And I was so drawn to it, and it was $5, and I just held it up, and I was to my husband, I was like, I want this so bad, but I don't know why. And he said, well, it's because you're a collector. And I was like, that was the first time that I realized that I had a problem. Because if you go, like, everything is, you know, not everything is $5, but there's a wide availability of it. And so I just, after a while, I'll go to the flea market with my in-laws, and there's always one booth that has like the cast iron booth. It's like all the
Mhm.
Griswold and the old lodge, stuff. And they'll
Right.
always be like, "Ooh, like, are you gonna get some cast iron?" And it's like, I can't, because my cupboards are already full. Like, it's like I can't buy any more skillets, because
Yeah.
how many skillets are you gonna? So I have that kind of connection to it, like the physical collection of these, like, I don't know if you would call them historic, but it's like cast iron toys, and
Yeah, yeah,
definitely the
yeah,
cookware,
yeah.
but cast iron hardware, like the amount of things that cast iron was used for before plastic was available
Mhm, mhm.
is amazing to
Yeah,
me,
it was
and I
completely
want it all.
verdant. Yeah, yeah. I don't necessarily collect. I have just like small little things. Like I have like this little tiny, it's no bigger than this, cast iron Aunt Jemima bank
Oh,
that
so like
this guy gave
two
me.
inches, 3 inches?
Yeah, I don't even, I've seen it recently.
It's
Oh wait, I can find it.
okay. Oh, wow.
So it's very small. It's just that
Oh,
big.
yeah.
And it's a
Yeah,
bank.
that's like 2 inches. Wow.
Yeah. And it's cast iron, has a little screw
Okay.
to open it up so you get your money out. But I
Yeah.
have some coins in there and I just keep it.
A couple of dimes you're saving for the fair.
Yeah. I don't know what's in there.
I don't know. I'm just teasing. I'm doing a call back to um your
Hmm.
plates.
I feel like I should open this so I could see what's in there and why. Hmm. Anyway, it
Hmm.
looks like pennies. I don't know why I would have pennies in there. But
Maybe it came with the minute. Maybe they're from a specific era. Who knows?
I don't know. I mean, I sometimes look for only copper pennies.
Yeah.
So they could be that's what I put in here, and then that would answer like sometimes I wonder where are those copper pennies. This might
Could
be where they
be.
are. I
Yeah.
will open it up afterwards and find out.
Yeah. I feel like we
Um,
should say to the people that are listening, it's a very small little coin bank.
yes, very
Yeah.
small. Yeah, very, very small. Oh, you said to
But
the people who are listening. Yes,
yeah.
it is a very, very small. But it's a little Aunt Jemima.
Yeah. It's
But yeah,
fantastic.
but no, one of the things I do is I always look and read the manhole covers
Oh. Yeah. And where they were cast, because
and
it'll
where they were
say,
cast. And yeah, because it says the foundry on it. And then I'll try to look up about that foundry to see where it is. I have a cauldron that I got in when I went to so that dreaming of Africa in Alabama. So it specifically references the little town that the descendants of the Clotilda's slave ship formed once they were set free. And when in searching for the town, I couldn't find it and I got lost. And I ended up in front of this elderly man's house who just had a sundry of knickknack in his yard. And I don't really know what I paid for it, but I bought a cast iron cauldron from him. And on the inside of it, I later was able to see that it had a name, and I looked it up, and it was actually a cast iron foundry. I don't know, so if it probably wasn't a foundry, but it was they made it was made in Philadelphia, and I'm from Philadelphia, so I thought that was pretty cool um,
yeah.
to go in search of that, and then to just kind of find that connection. Yeah, so I'm always looking up or reading the manhole covers and just figuring out where the iron came, who made it, who pressed it, where did it come from, or whatever. And so I find that intriguing.
Yeah. So like it's really interesting for me to kind of break out of my normal, like in talking to people that have different interests in the iron, like
Mm-hmm.
maybe how they use it to relate to other people, or you talking about how we all originated from iron and it's in our,
Mm-hmm.
and so that's not something that I naturally even was aware of. And so that's why talking to people like you that have an awareness of that really helps me. I still collect it and like it and all of that, but this is like a next level of me understanding all of the different facets
Yeah,
that make up this.
it's literally a part of you.
Yeah.
It is literally in your DNA. That iron that you're collecting is the same iron in your DNA. So it makes sense that you would be attached to it.
Yeah. Yeah. And just like having this be drawn, my attention be drawn to this history, because it's, you know, just not something that I was aware of.
Yeah, it's very fascinating to me.
So
Um,
these wow, I already have forgotten what they were called, but the it's like an iron plantation.
yeah, they were literally called iron plantations.
So where were they um mainly located? Like, was there a place where there
So
were more of them in the
so the iron, so if in the north where you're not having slavery, not that slavery didn't exist, but it did.
Mm-hmm.
But for them, they're just called furnaces.
Okay.
But in the southern areas below the Mason-Dixon line, they are called plantations. And so they refer to them as iron plantations. And there were, I'd have to look on a map. I think I might have once had a map where it would show an outline of different furnaces. But again, you have to follow the typography of the land, and you're looking for these lime deposits. And I find it fascinating that they were aware of this. I don't know why I find that fascinating, but they were aware of, I guess, what it took to smelt iron, or to smelt whatever to get to the iron to make the pig iron. But yeah, they were along the Carolinas, Tennessee. Not they weren't as plentiful as the agricultural plantations, but they were certainly very much a part of the industrial revolution. And this is, how we get to laying iron for tracks for the railroad and all of these things. So it's all interconnected.
Yeah.
And these are all coming out of and coming from these iron plantations, and the pig iron that they made to then make the next thing. But for example, I think it's like Bethlehem Steel would have been like a really big place in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, but that's because they're actually more molding, or taking that raw material and molding it into the steel and the
products,
beams and the products and so forth. And there's a place, my brother lives in Coatesville, and there's a big steel factory there. And
what state is that in?
Pennsylvania.
Okay, got
So
it.
there were a great number of furnaces in Pennsylvania. I think there's even a place called Furnace, Pennsylvania. And like George is from Irontown, Ohio. So towns that have those names, there was probably an iron furnace of some sort in there. And I always thought it was interesting that George was from a place called Irontown, and he was like this like big guy in the iron art community. And I was like, don't you think that's interesting, George? He'd be like, yeah.
It is.
So unassuming. I was like, but George, Irontown. I think it was Ohio. But yeah, I was like, that's fascinating. There's an irony in that. But in Coatesville, the steel factory there, which probably is only maybe a centesimal portion of what it used to be, but the some of the beams or some of the metal from the World Trade Center that came down were from there, and then some of them went back to be recycled and be reused in something or whatever they did with them. But I remember my brother told me about it, and I was like, wow, can we go by there?
Yeah.
Like, no. I was like, I mean, you pass it, but I was like, but can we stop and go inside? And he could not understand my fascination. I was like, but it's iron and steel, and they did. And he was like, no, we're not going there. But I would have stopped and gone, and I don't know what I would have seen or found. But even like Bethlehem Steel, it doesn't even exist anymore. It was dismantled, and I don't know. I don't think some sort of upsea living community or something that they did with it. But yeah, so to just the lack of need for labor and for the things that we used to manufacture is
Yeah.
also tied to it and makes it sort of a rather sad story in the sense that when you see, like, the last piece I did wasn't even on iron, but it was sort of about it. So there's this sculpture that I did where I cast like over 12,000 ceramic eggshells. And the whole point of it had to do with Taylorism, which is what the Industrial Revolution is pretty much sort of modeled from. So Taylor, whoever he basically was this guy that sort of theorized systems of labor.
Okay.
And like, so how do you, so in other words, how long, if you have a, I don't know, let's say we're going to make a cat and we need to make 10,000 cats.
Oh.
So we deconstruct and we know that there might be, I don't know how many bones are in a cat, but let's say there are 100 bones in a cat. So this whole thing was one, using this mathematical formula to break down, all right, I got 100 bones, I need 10,000 cats. How many bones is that going to be? How many of this bone, this bone, this bone, this bone? How long is it going to take me to get those bones? Once I have those bones, how long is it going to take to assemble the cat before? And then what is the finished product of the cat going to look like? Do we spray paint the hair? Whatever all that was. So that whole journey of mapping that out and figuring out what is it going to take to manufacture something, it falls under this concept of Taylorism, which is named after this man named somebody Taylor.
Okay.
So,
Yeah.
so my sculpture, which is really called Ambient Void, is based on the two things. One, Taylorism, like figuring out, once I figured out that I needed 12,000 eggshells, and it was like, how long is it going to take me to get to those eggshells? How long will it take me? How many molds do I need to make? And how often do I need to pour the ceramic slip? How much, clay, and because I was making my own slip. So how much, raw materials do I need to go out and buy to keep having a mixture of this? How many times do I need to mix this? How long is the mixture going to last? Yada, yada, yada. So there was this element of Taylorism in creating this sculpture. But the other part of the sculpture had to do with the absence or the lack of labor. So I try to make this make sense. So in the studio there at Georgia State, where it was located at the time, it's downtown, but downtown had a plethora of homeless people. And I would stay in the studio really, really late. And sometimes I would leave at 2 or 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock in the morning. And there is a particular time in that downtown landscape where homeless people are rising from their slumber and migrating to a place for food. Okay. So if you were to go outside and it's still kind of dark, they're shrouded in their blankets, and they're just kind of moving across the landscape, almost just like these, they're ambient voids. So, but my whole thing is that there was these people we had in our society, as we've gone from industry to, I don't know, service, service industry to tech industry, so forth and so forth. There is absolutely no more need for their physical bodies. We have no more need for their bodies as a society, as a process of capitalism and making and non-making. There is no need for their physical bodies to make that thing that they might have previously made or might have previously had the opportunity to track into an industry to make. That doesn't exist. So those same people did not have whatever other foundations in society to transition the use of their bodies to something else. Just like we transition from, service industry and we want to upgrade, then we learn technology. So we then, go into, tech industry. Who knows what's after this? Information age, all of these things. We'll all just be AI geniuses and just be manipulating the world with bots. Who knows?
Yeah.
Point is that in making that sculpture, I was trying to address both Taylorism and this lack of need for the human body in those industries in which they once served, be it, iron or steel or whatever it was, manufacturing, whatever it was that doesn't exist. And so the sculpture is 10 feet. It's 10 feet by 4 feet. And if so there's this cascade of these shells, but if you approach the sculpture at a certain perspective, there is a void of a human figure.
Oh,
so it's called ambient void. So again, they're present, but they're not present. We can see them, ignore them. We can, not see them. And it's all perspective, how you move in the world, what you choose to look at, what angle you look at something, what is it that you're going to see, and how do you respond to it when you see it? So anyway, that was my long time ago. Those eggs are in a crate somewhere. As all art, if it doesn't get sold or it doesn't find some way of being multiply exhibited, it just kind of gets folded up and put in storage.
But it's still, I feel like the theme rings true today, even more so now.
Yeah, totally. So yeah.
It's interesting too, because I grew up in Massachusetts, and there was a lot of abandoned mill buildings around like the Fall River area and Lowell, Massachusetts. Mm-hmm. And I feel like in Philadelphia, where there those same types of, I remember, driving by them with my parents and my mom explaining that they used to be mills, like to make fabric, I believe. Like it was fabric.
It's probably fabric, probably for upholstery. Furniture, upholstery, some type of fabric for clothing, textiles, anything like that. That was a really big textile manufacturing area. The same in Philadelphia. It was there was a big New Jersey, like carpets and things like that just don't have an existence anymore. There's a really good book called I think it's called The Closing. And it's a photographer and a writer who document the closing of I think it was a furniture manufacturer in North Carolina. And so they document the last days. It's a photo documentary. And the book is called The Closing. And it's really, really wonderful. Just, again, wonderful is not a really good word for these things, but it's quite engaging and riveting to look at these lives. And it was done probably back in the late 90s, this book, but it's, and I don't have it with me, but I have it in my collection somewhere. But people should, but it helps you to understand like what happened, why did the things close? Mostly because they get exported out for cheaper labor, because some big manufacturers like, I can make more money. Not that they need more money, but I could make more money. Again, it goes back to Taylorism, because the whole point of Taylorism is to, not exercise, but exercise the largest profit from all of that. You want to control all that. You want to understand all of those components in the manufacturing process so that you can maximize profits.
At whatever cost possible.
Exactly. It's not to the good of humanity at all. So it's interesting. And somehow it all goes back to iron.
So I kind of am interested about the rest of your life. We kind of stopped at Georgia State, and obviously is really great to spend some time there. in your story and your journey, but like I also know that you're a multifaceted person, and I want the listeners to realize that we can be really interested in whatever facet that we're interested in with iron, but we also have other parts that we're passionate about in our lives. So what happened after Georgia State?
After Georgia State, I got a Fulbright and I went to live in Nigeria for a year. And it was based on studying the lost wax process in Nigeria, and based on studying my head. And I know that sounds kind of strange, but
we're all artists. We'll take it and roll with it.
I was making these little cast iron heads.
Okay.
And I think the first time I made them out of porcelain. And then when I went to Georgia State, I started making them out of iron. And I used that as my application for my Fulbright. And it was basically based on the concept of Ori, O-R-I. And Ori is the Yoruba concept of how humans have heads. And so in a short mythological version, before you're born, you walk into a room full of heads and you pick a head. And you don't know anything about that head. That's the head you pick. And I think you walk into another room and you pick a destiny, and then you're born. And when you're born, your head and your destiny, go through this journey together, and you're trying to stay in alignment with whatever that information was for the head and the destiny, because you forget. Once you're born, once you sort of come through the birth canal, you forget what that is. And so they have a system for you to remember, and that is that you see a diviner. You see a diviner called a Babalao, and that diviner helps you stay on track, stay in alignment with your destiny. So like one of your primary questions is, like, let's say I want to skydive. I don't, but let's say
it's a theoretical
hypothetical. But let's say that I have this golden opportunity, a month from now, to go on this skydiving expedition. Well, if I was a smart, obedient person, I would go to a diviner and I would ask, is it best for my destiny for me to go on this adventure and skydive? And the answer is going to be yes or no. It's going to it may or may not require a sacrifice. Let's say that the answer is no. But I just really, really want to do it. I just feel like I just have to do it, which I don't. Then I could make a sacrifice. He could then see if a sacrifice would be acceptable to make the way as smooth as possible for me to do this whole skydiving thing. And maybe in doing the sacrifice, I avert the fact that the plane crashes. And so my skydiving is a different type of skydiving than what I think from parachute skydiving. Or I, do the sacrifice and luckily my parachute opens where it could possibly have not opened, which might be why it might have been no, that I shouldn't have done it or whatever. You don't really know. You're making choices, but basically you're asking life-changing, you're seeing the diviner based on life-changing situations that are happening to you. Skydiving is, could be one of them, but maybe marriage, like, is it best to marry this person? Are our destinies in alignment that we should marry and move forward with all that marriage entails? Mm-hmm. And so you just periodically check on these things to see. And because the point is that you're trying to honor what your head said you were going to do when you came to earth. Mm-hmm. Like, I'm going to, so my head said something. I don't know what my head told me. I sometimes still wonder, like, what did I say I was going to do? I experience things and I'm like, I am sure that I did not say I was going to do that, So, your goal is to stay in alignment. And so I was studying that philosophical concept of Ori and studying it also in relationship to the lost wax process of making actual heads.
Mm-hmm. So Do they have a tradition of casting there?
Yeah, they have an immense tradition of casting
Is it
in
related to casting
heads.
heads?
Yes, it is related to casting heads.
So tell me.
So for example, like right now, one of the biggest things in the news is the repatriation of the Benin bronzes, which are not actually bronze, but a combination of some metals. But they're frequently called Benin bronzes, but they are very figurative sculptures that were stolen by the British in 1897 when they I think it's called the Expedition of 1897. So in retaliation to one of the local kings not doing what the British wanted them to do, as they were, trying to control this country and monopolize it and capitalize off of it, they eventually went and destroyed that kingdom and stole all of their artwork. Which I don't know that back then that they necessarily termed it as artwork. They had more functionality to the objects and so forth. So at this point, I think Britain owns probably the majority of the heads, but most recently Germany sent some back to Benin, Nigeria. And so there's a big thing going on about, the repatriation of artworks that were taken by colonial powers and what the responsibility is to return them. Like there's the Elgin marbles that Britain and I think is it Italy?
I'm not sure, but I am familiar with the.
So one of those two countries are constantly battling about, give me my marbles back. And they're not really marbles, like shooting marbles. They just, I don't know why
I feel like they're carved.
Yeah, they're carved and they're very large things.
Yeah.
It's just called Elgin marbles, but I think it might be because they're made out of marble.
Yes, I think you're right. And I feel like Elgin
but they're
might have
actually
been
very large. Elgin was the person who, I think Elgin might have been who took them.
Oh, for crying out loud.
Yeah, I mean.
The person that took them. Gosh, so it's like, I do remember something in like a grad senior seminar.
Get named after the
person who stole them. That's
exactly, yeah. It's kind of interesting. Things get named after the thief.
That's awful.
It doesn't happen, like present day. Like if you're, I don't know, if your car gets stolen, you don't your car doesn't get named after the thief or whatever. But back then, lots of things got named after the thief or the place where they were stolen from or whatever. But yeah, the Elgin marbles is another one of those things that's in hot debate on a diplomatic level of trying to have them returned.
Yeah. Rightfully so.
I think they recently struck a deal. I haven't read what the deal is, but anyway.
So you're in Africa.
So I'm in Africa and I'm there for a year. And while I'm there, I become a chief. And so I am a African chief. My title is Yeye Olamo Osara of Ile Ife. And so I am a chief to a very ancient African deity who rules the water. And her name is Osara. She is the mother. She's the mother of us all. That's what Olomo is, mother of us all. She is the mother of the Yoruba people. So she and her co-wife were married to the king, but the co-wife, who was the first wife, didn't have children. And Olokun was the first wife who asked Osara, they were friends, Osara, would you marry the king so that he could have children? Because Osara already had 200 children. So she marries the king and has another child. And so that gives her 201 children. And that child is the son of Oduduwa. His name is Okanbi. And it's the children of Okanbi who go out and become rulers over the land that people know historically as Yoruba land or the Yoruba kingdoms. And so all of his kids go out and intermarry into other ethnic groups or tribes, and they flourish and create these amazing kingdoms that exist until the Portuguese and whoever else comes along with their ideal for slavery and or the transatlantic slave trade portion of slavery.
Yeah.
And things just begin to dismantle. There was a bit of war before all that, but yeah, but that helps to completely dismantle things. This is the issue of slavery. But yeah, so I did that, and I'm still a chief.
Yeah.
It's been 11 years now that I've been chief yay, and I came back to the U.S. after a year and did a fellowship at Penn State and did this project called the Human Touch Project, which uses wax. So that's why I have those big slabs of wax, uh, because I had to reformulate the wax into these little dollops of wax.
Okay.
And so that when people touch the wax, they could reconfigure it. So it was a project. It came about from. It's kind of interesting. It came about when I was in Africa. A little kid and their mom and the kid came to visit.
Uh-huh.
And I had some wax that I was playing with. But as the mother and I are talking, we need to occupy the kid. The mother and I can talk. So I just give the kid some wax to play with. And when they left, I was intrigued by I don't want to say I don't know what they made, but I was intrigued by these little things that they made. But I kept thinking about touch, because you could like see their little pinch, their little touch.
Yeah.
And so I just kept thinking about touch and human touch. And so I applied for a fellowship to do this project called the Human Touch Project, and it was initiated at Penn State. And so there are dollops of wax, and there are 4 or 5 different colors that each one could be blue, yellow, red, or orange, and each color represented a different emotion. And
Okay.
so if the person picked, so the wax would be in a box and it would just have the little blue code on it or something. So let's say you picked blue. So I would simply ask you to take that dollop of wax and reconfigure the dollop of wax into your interpretation of what, in this case, for the project, blue represented pride. So you figured the dollop of wax into that. The next person might have orange. I think orange was creativity. You refigured it into that. And so I have probably like 3,000 of these things.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, again.
All by different people?
All by different people, because I would travel around. I would set up on campus and do it. I would travel to different locations, to DC, to wherever anybody was willing to host me, and set up and just randomly have people to do this. And the ultimate goal was it was basically about the transference of energy. So you have reconfigured your thing into this wax. So when the things go on display, which I never ever got that opportunity to display them, but when they go on display, someone else will come along and has the opportunity to pick up that same configuration that you did and completely alter it. And it had to do with the synergy of transferring one person's energy to another person, to another person, to another person, to another person.
Wow.
And so that was the Human Touch Project.
That's beautiful.
And so I did that. And I did the project for a long time, but what I actually found out in doing that project was that I wasn't making anything.
Mm-hmm.
It was a great concept. I had conceptualized it, but I was just facilitating the project for like maybe a good 3 or 4 years. But the facilitation took up a lot of time and energy, and I wasn't able to make anything. And I noticed the loss of making. Mm-hmm. And so that's when I had to make a decision. Do I keep this project going, which is a really cool project? People really like it, but I don't have time to make anything. And I really feel the loss of that. So I opted to set the project to the side so that I could return to making.
Mm-hmm. I think that's understandable.
To me, it seemed like it was.
Yeah.
It was a pull, a tug for like, it took me like a year to make that decision. Mm-hmm. Actually, because it was such a successful project. But I just, I missed my own hands-on making of things. Mm-hmm. So I did that. Then it took about, after that job, it took maybe a year before I found another job. And then I ended up finding a teaching position at a small college in Mississippi. And I was with that job up into a few days ago. And so I'm no longer, yay,
Yeah.
I about a year ago, I took a artist in residency in Santa Fe, New Mexico.
Okay.
At the Art Institute of Santa Fe, or the Santa Fe Art Institute, something like that. So I did a residency for 3 months, and I just decided to parlay that residency in relocating. So I now live in Santa Fe, and I still looking for work, but I do have one project that I'm doing now. I recently scored a contract to do yoga in prison. So I have a yoga in prison project that I do through a local nonprofit that I'm on the board of, the Santa Fe Community Yoga Center. So Santa Fe Community Yoga Center has a contract with the corrections department, and so I facilitate that project, and we're in our 5th week. So we just started. So this is the tomorrow I go 3 days a week.
Wow.
And until I can find a yoga teacher, because I'm not. I'm a yoga teacher, but it wasn't supposed to have been structured that way. It was structured for me to facilitate it, and it would be a yoga teacher. But long story, not a yoga.
You'll
teacher
find them.
yet.
You'll
But yes,
find
so
them.
I'm looking for a yoga teacher, and once I have that yoga teacher in place, I will no longer be the yoga teacher. I would just facilitate the project, and the whole project is to. So this is where my little anthropology comes into play. The whole project is designed to determine whether yoga, mindfulness, and meditation has an impact on recidivism.
Mm-hmm.
And so, if so, but it's going really, really well so far. I would say that this first 8 week would be like the beta phase of the. But there are quite a number of women who are going to be released soon, and they are interested in becoming yoga teachers and taking to get them. So now I'm trying to figure out how to find money to get them plugged into the prospective communities that they're going back to. New Mexico is pretty rural, so finding a teacher training program that's willing to offer a fellowship for them, because it's pretty pricey. It's like $3,500 to do yoga teacher training. It's really quite pricey.
Cost prohibitive, especially
yeah, it's
if
very
you're
cost prohibitive. So I'm trying to find funds so that I can plug those women into training that they can then take back to their communities and start teaching yoga to their community and have a little side hustle.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where I'm at this point. Haven't really done any artwork, still kind of getting settled and just job hunting, and doing a little photography. I think that when I lived here before, I did photography, so I've kind of returned to that. And just mostly nature, just examining nature and just kind of bringing nature inside and setting it up in a little makeshift studio and trying to capture the photograph before the cat destroys the little nature objects.
Yeah.
So that, and then I have been for maybe the last 6 years teaching a class at Brown University in the summertime. So I'm going to cut out for the summer and teach a class it's an environmental design class for a group of international students. And so I will do that, and then I will come back. So that's pretty much it. That's it.
But I feel like, so you said you've been teaching that class at Brown for a while. What else? So I feel like that's hot on the horizon, but it's also something that you've been doing. What do you got hot on the horizon?
Besides, well, this class is actually new. So this is the second year for that class. The first couple of years, I taught a experimental sculpture class where the students could only use paper.
Okay.
So they just could use paper. They could do they could acquire the paper however they wanted to acquire it, but they could only make their work by through the use of paper. But this is the second year for the environmental design class, and it's called Build a Better Mousetrap. And students are confronted, they decide what environmental conundrum they want to try to resolve. So they pick an environmental conundrum and then they do the research for it, and they have to do what is apparently no longer an appropriate term, but they write a white paper. And I don't know why white paper is no longer the good title anymore, but anyway, they write a blue paper. But anyway, they have to write a white paper that basically sort of outlines what the problem is, how it is they're trying to resolve the problem, what are some of the factors in the resolution, and all this kind of stuff. So they do that, and then they have to prototype whatever this is that they are, thinking that they're going to make or use to resolve whatever the conundrum is. So it's pretty cool. It's like a 3-week intensive class. It goes every day for I think it's like 3 or 4 hours a day that we meet for 3 weeks, 5 days a week, and just try to get through it and see what happens.
Get after
it. I don't,
yeah.
So it's fun. I don't know what they're going to make, and they're all coming from different places in the world with different perspectives and different, environmental concerns. And I try to make sure they don't get depressed, because I think climate change and environmental stuff is depressing. So we spend a lot of time outside looking at trees and green grass and things that can help us stay cheerful and not, overly depressed. And I try to give them reading things that are more inspirational than just gloom and doom. In 9 days, the earth will end. You must recycle now. Just it's like, because it's at that point it would just seem impossible. Who would do anything?
Sometimes it seems like that too.
Yeah.
But then looking at the trees and being outside, and it's also, is it in Providence, Rhode Island?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so it's summers in Providence are really beautiful.
Yeah.
They can be
pretty warm, but they're really nice, and the ocean's not far away. And then they go off and do a lot of things on their own over the weekend and so forth. So yeah, so I'm looking forward to it. I'm gonna go to Boston, see a couple of exhibitions, and just check some things out and have fun.
Yeah.
So that's pretty much it. I think that's enough for now.
I think so. I think you've done a fantastic job, and I've learned so much from you.
Thank you.
And I think that a good way to kind of round out the public part of this interview would be if you had any advice for us.
Oh, wow. Advice. Be happy. Just be happy. The world has enough to not be happy about, but just be happy, smile, be happy, laugh. Find something every day to make you smile, make you laugh. It will possibly make you live longer, and it might make you make happier work, happier art. Yeah.
It's simple, but it's not like the simplicity is very potent.
Challenging. Yeah, it can be challenging to people sometimes just to smile and be happy.
Yeah.
But that would be my advice. That's the advice I give the ladies in my yoga class. Smile, be happy, laugh. It's good for you.
It really is. Yeah. And it's not always easy, but if you can focus on it and get through it, it helps. Yeah.
So that would be my advice.
Well, thank you so much. So I want to go over to the after show because I kind of want to ask you some specifics about the casting in Africa. Like maybe some of the like people that you studied with and the techniques that if they were different than what you did in school and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
But do you have any thing that you can think of that you would want to talk about in the after show to kind of tease for the listeners? I don't know. If not, that's fine.
No, we can talk about that. Casting there was very interesting and somewhat scary because they're like walking around in flip-flops and casting iron, and you're seeing the molten iron, and they're just, casually in shorts and flip-flops. Very different from our whole scene where we're all geared up, we're all protected.
Okay. Well, I'm really excited to hear all of those details. So let's close it out for the public show. So for the public audience, I just want to say, thank you so much for being on the show, Phoenix.
Thank Thank you.
And I've learned, like, I'm just excited to keep learning more in the after show from you, but you definitely have a brilliance and a light in your personality and in your
Thank
soul
you.
that I'm not going to go too far into it, but I had a really long day at work today, and people that are listening, they don't know when we're recording, but this is, we're doing this you're in New Mexico, so it's a little bit
It's 7
earlier for
o'clock. Yeah,
you.
it's 7 o'clock right here.
So before we started the interview, and it was like 6:15 for me, I was exhausted. And
Yeah.
I feel like I just drank a cup of coffee because you've given me so much historical knowledge that I didn't know about iron
Mhm.
and industrial America and all of that I'm really excited to actually do my research myself and
Mhm.
just dive into that. Like, you found it so interesting. I'm really so glad and grateful that you introduced it to me. And I feel kind of like I've gotten a second wind, which now I'm going to try and go to bed so that I can get up and go to work tomorrow. But
Right.
thank you for sending this energy and breath of life all
You're
the way
welcome.
through the Zoom call to
You're
me.
so welcome. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. All right. So everybody who's watching and listening, come on over to the after show, and we're going to talk about casting in Africa. But if you can't make it over there, I understand, and I'm just really glad that you joined us for this, anyways. And again, Phoenix, thanks again,
Thank you. You're
and
welcome.
we'll see you guys in the next one. Okay.
All
Bye.
right. Bye.
Thank you so much for tuning in today. This conversation doesn't have to end here. To gain access to the after show where Phoenix and I continue our discussion, visit the website patreon.com/thepodcastiron. Their supporters at any contribution level get access to the after show recordings from each episode that's ever been published. And so if you're new here, the after show is just an extra 15 to 20 minutes, sometimes more, with each show's guest, where we talk a little more candidly and share at least one more story behind the privacy of a paywall. So yes, if you sign up now, you'll get access to listen to the after show from this episode and all of the after shows from our earlier episodes. So if you like what I'm doing with this project and you want to support the show, this is the best way to do it. For as little as $1 a month, it really does make a difference in subsidizing the costs that I undertake to make this resource publicly available, and you get the after shows. So it's a win for everyone. Well, in conclusion of this public portion of the episode, I hope you enjoyed listening to this interview. I am so glad that Phoenix reached out and was interested in chatting with me about her work as well as her research into iron plantations and the interesting details behind that aspect of American iron casting history. Phoenix, thank you so much for this conversation and for sharing your life experiences in iron art and your artistic journey, as well as teaching me about the role iron plantations played in our country's history. This is fascinating to me, and I'm eager to read the books you mentioned during your interview so I can better wrap my head around the facts. I'm so glad that we met, and I learned a whole lot from you, not just about iron history, but about life. And now, thank you to our top supporters for helping me afford to continue offering this show. Thank you to the Western Cast Iron Art Alliance for being a top supporter, and I'm so honored and encouraged to have your support. Thank you for everything that you do in service of the Western region of the U.S. and its cast iron artists. Thank you, Sloss Metal Arts, for being a top supporter of this podcast and also for your year-round work as a National Center for Iron Casting and Metal Arts, and for offering our community visiting artist and resident artist opportunities that actually offer realistic living benefits. And thank you, Crescent Creative, for being a top sponsor of the podcast Iron, and also for demonstrating how artists can create an interesting and inspiring living for themselves by producing custom client work. You are a great role model to many of us. So yes, in closing, thank you to all of our other individual supporters on Patreon. The funds that everyone there contribute are invaluable to help me to continue to afford to put on this show. But if you don't have it in your budget to support the Podcast Iron on Patreon, I understand. Instead, if you could please share this podcast with someone you think would be interested in listening or watching, and I'll appreciate that just as much. Anything and everything helps. And for that, I say thank you from the bottom of my heart. If you want to get in touch with me, you can email me at thepodcastiron@gmail.com. Thanks again for listening and watching. I'm sending you all my love always, and I can't wait to share the next episode with you. I'll talk to you soon and have a great day.